We're on Daf Chav Ches Amud Beis, and we're up to we did Masir ben Shmuel. Oh, we started the Agadita. Let's just finish up on the Agadita. Second. Oh no, actually, we already started Chav Tes Amud Aleph. So we said here, Hure Avera Koshume Avera Simonach Recha de Bisra. Right, if you have someone who cannot eat the meat, but he smells the meat, then it's even more difficult than someone who at least can satiate his appetite by eating. And the Gemara says, Shili de kaita, kasha mikaita. The heat at the end of the summer, which is after August, that's already Chodesh Elul, is even more intense than the heat at the middle of the summer months. Like, for example, Chodesh Tammuz. So somehow, when we get to Elul, the heat is very intense. I don't know if it's on a daily basis, but occasionally. And that's more challenging than the heat during the month of August. V'simonach tanura shgira. Tanur sisiko pamayim o sholosh b'osayom. He keeps heating up his oven time after time. And with each successive time, it gets hot quicker. And he needs less of fuel, less of the logs to feed the fire because there's already an accumulation of heat inside the oven. And so too in the case of the kayetz of the summer months, the air has been heated up and bodies are hot and there's an accumulation of heat. And towards the end of the summer, mimayer lischamim, there's the body gets hot very quickly. Then the Gemara says, Ishta de sitva kasha midakatya. If let's say you get fever, if you're ill, chas shalom, during the winter months, it's even more difficult than fever of a sick person during the summer months. The simonach tanura krira. If you have a cold oven and it hasn't been heated up yet, so then you need a lot of a lot of wood and fuel in order to start up the fire. And in the case of the winter months, when the air is cold and the body is cold, if a person gets sick with fever, then certainly it's going to be a very, very difficult fever. Nigmar bat tikta, when you learn something that you already know but you've forgotten, kasha michadet is even more challenging than learning it for the first time in the round. Simonach tina bar tina. In other words, you have cement, and if you want to make cement out of cement, like let's say you have, some leftover cement, it's even more difficult. Rabbi Avo, my time of the Rebbe. Rebbe said, if you recall, that was we covered yesterday, that when the rays of the sun move in all different directions, they spread out. Dichsiv, and the Gemara says in the name of Rabbi Avo that Rebbe derived it from a pasuk. Lamanatseach al ayeles hashachar. Okay, so this is the 22nd chapter of Tehillim, and the Gemara is trying to analyze what does it mean ayeles hashachar. Right, ayala is like a gazelle or a deer. And what's hashachar in the morning? Ma ayala zu karneo maftzilos the dawn is compared to the horns of a gazelle, and maftsilos, the horns go in different directions. Lekanu lekan. Af shachar zeh, so too daybreak when the sun rises. Maftzia lekanu lekan. The light is split and it goes in all directions. The entire eastern horizon is lit up. Now, this kapitel, number 22, was recited by Esther when she went in to Achashverosh. Amar Rabbi Zera, Lama Nimshala Esther li Ayala. Why does it say Lama Natseach al Ayelas HaShachar? And Ayelas HaShachar is a reference to Esther. Lomar Lecha, Ma Ayala Rachmat Sar. The gazelle, let's just see, just 1 second. I keep translating it as, just see if he translates it as a deer. Let's see. Oh, he translates a hind, Hind. All right. But we're asking now, what is the equation between this deer, this hind, and Esther? So it's like reproductive organs are very narrow, and therefore when the male mates with the female, it's very pleasurable because of the structure of the reproductive system. Is af Esther chaviva achashverosh kol shah v'shah kisha rishona. That whenever Achashverosh would have an intimate relationship, he was very, it was a great pleasure for him. Omar of Asi, Lomanim Shal Esther l'shachar. Why is Esther compared to the dawn? Ayelet hashachar. Lomar l'cha ma shachar sof kol halayla, af Esther sof kol hanisa. The night ends with daybreak, and all the Nisim end with Purim. Purim is the last of the Nisim. So Gemara asks why Ika Chanukah. Like 200 years after Purim was Chanukah, and that was a great miracle. So the Gemara reinterprets it, and he says, Nidali Kasef Kamri. The last miracle that would be recorded in Tanakh and would become an integral part of Kisvei HaKodesh would be the miracle of Purim. After Purim, we have no more miracles that are incorporated into Tanakh, into the 24 books of the Holy Writ. Now, the Gemara is assuming that Esther, Megillus Esther, is part of Kisvei HaKodesh. That's the way we understand it today. But in truth, in the Gemara Megillah, there's a whole debate about that. What's the status of Megillus Esther? The Gemara therefore says, that Megillus Esther was incorporated in the Kisvei HaKodesh, then Enochinami. Chanukah, which is much later, was not incorporated into Tanakh. In fact, we have very little historical sources for Chanukah. We just have a Brisa in the Gemara, and then, then you have to really read the what's called the Sfarim Achitzonim, Josephus, and whatever books you read, the Maccabim, to get an idea of blow by blow what happened. But there's no Torah Shebechsav with regard to Chanukah. Chanukah is purely 100% Torah Shebal Peh, whereas Purim, according to one Madiyam, is an integral part of Torah Shebechsav. But Laman Yomer Esther Lo Nitnali Kasev, according to one opinion, that everything that we have in Megillah is Torah Shabbal Peh, is Ma'ikal Mema. We're back to our first question. Why is Purim the last of the Nisim, when in fact Hanukkah should be the last of the Nisim? So the Gemara says, Mukim La. No, it's that man the Yoma who says that Esther is not part of Kisvei HaKodesh. He will interpret the Pasuk Hayeled HaShachar in a different way. It's not referring to Shachar as the end of the night, meaning the last of the miracles, but rather Ki Rabbi Yomin Bar Yefes Amar Blosam Lama Nimshalu Tfilosan Shel Tzadikim Kayeles. Why do we find that the prayers are compared, Vatzadik are compared to Ayeles? And at this point, in order to understand this Gemara, we have to mention Rashi here, because Rashi says, like, why is this pasuk being interpreted as referring to tefillah? But there's no indication that there's tefillah here. But the answer is, says Rashi, that the word shachar is actually a lashon tefillah, and he comes up with a pasuk in Yeshaya. And the pasuk indicates that shachar, it says ashrech asharecha, and it's a reference to tefillah, the bakashas tachnunim. And now the tefillah of the tzaddikim is going to be compared to ayala. So ayelas hashachar, the word shachar here refers to tefillah, and ayelas hashachar is referring to the tefillah of the tzaddikim. Why is the tefillah of tzaddikim called ayeles? Lomar lecha, ma ayala zu, kol zman shemegadeles, as it grows older, karneo maftsilos, its horns spread in each direction. Is af tzaddikim kol zman shemar mitfil tfilos and itchmas. The tefillah of the tzaddikim goes in all directions, and it might not hit its mark, meaning we don't know if it was accepted on high right now. It wasn't accepted on high, but the tefillah is there. It shoots out. And later on, at some point, Hashem will hearken to those tefillahs. But the tefillahs of tzaddikim have that staying power, that they will always be there. Even if at that moment in time when they prayed, it was not accepted, but it will be accepted. All right, that's the Agadata. Now we get to the Halacha. And we're about to learn a very challenging sugya in Kodshin. So first of all, let's mention that there was a psul in the Korban Tamid on that occasion when they mistakenly identified the light that came from the heavens as the light of the sun, when in truth it was the light of the moon. And v'shachtu es hatamid, and as a result of the fact that they shechted the tamid, then it says, just 1 second, horidu, we have to go back to the Mishnah for a second. Says, "V'shachtu es haPesach, v'hotziuhu lebeis hasreifa." They got the message, the testimony, that it was already morning and it was time for, the sun had already risen, it's time for the shechting of the Korban Tamid. They shechted the Korban Tamid. And then otiu lebeis hasreifa, they had to burn it. And then it says in the Mishnah, horidu kohen gadol lebeis hatefila. Now, the Gemara understands that horidu lekohen gadol lebeis hatefila is a continuation of what we had earlier in the Mishnah. They made a mistake. They thought it was day. And then when they realized their mistake, that they had actually shechted the Karban Tamid during the nighttime, Shalo Kiddin. So the Kohen Gadol went down to the Beis HaTevilah in preparation for a second round to replace the first round of Hakravas HaTamid, because the first round was done during the nighttime. So we need another round. So the Gemara asks Amos, when did this occur? Did this occur on Yom Kippur? Elam, if we assume B'Shar Yemos Hashana, it was not Yom Kippur. Now you have to add here another point. How could they, if it's not Yom Kippur, then when would they have made a mistake identifying the moon as the sun? It would have to be later in the month, right? The moon waxes and it gives more light later on in the month. So Ilema, if this happened, B'Shai Mos Hashana, so then why is the Mishnah talking about a Kohen Gadol? Lo Sayid, the Lav Kohen Gadol? Let it be any Kohen. And here we have to mention that the fundamental difference between Yom Kippurim and the rest of the year, as far as Avodas HaKarban is concerned, is that whereas Yom Kippur requires Kohen Gadol, the rest of the year we don't require a Kohen Gadol. So why does that Mishnah mention Kohen Gadol in this context if we're talking about Shar Yemos Hashana? Ella, by virtue of the fact that it says that the Avodas Dafka Kohen Gadol is B'Yom Kippur. We're not talking about an event that took place during the course of the year, because then we have no reason to introduce the Kohen Gadol. We're talking about an event that took place on Yom Kippur. Or says that doesn't satisfy the rational mind, because Ma'or Levana Me'ika. It's only later on in the year, later on in the month, that the light of the moon is more pronounced and more intense. But the 10th of the month, the moon might be beginning to appear, but it's not what you call a full moon. Ma'or Levana Me'ika. How would they have possibly made this mistake? He writes here, Ha'im Me'or Levana Tzomeach Samuch Li'alos HaShachar B'Yom Kippurim, which is at the beginning of the month, Harei L'Kras Sof HaChodesh HaLevana Tzomachas Samuch Li'alos HaShachar Below B'Shlish HaRishon Shel HaChodesh. So the Gemara is working with the premise that the mistake of the light of the Levana could only be feasible towards the end of the month. So now the Gemara is going to say, you know what? We're not talking about Yom Kippurim, but what we should do is split the Mishnah into two parts, two paragraphs. Here's how you're going to have to read the Mishnah. The Yom Kippurim, that's a new paragraph, a new section in the Mishnah. In other words, first we're going to talk about a case where they made a mistake and they shechted the Karban Tamid too early. That happened during the course of the year, and it happened at the end of a Hebrew calendar month, because that's when the moon is. When I say the end, I don't know, maybe it means the second half of a month. And that's when the light of the moon is very intense. And here's where they could make a mistake. And then they brought it down as Kodshim Psulim, and they burnt it b'sreifa. Now the Mishnah moves on to Horidu Kohen Gadol lebeis hatvila. Now we're talking already about Yom Kippurim, and we're back to the Seder Avodas Hayom. Ki Omar Barak Bar Kai. Now, we had a number of different possibilities as to what the witness, on top of the roof, what exactly did he declare? And we're assuming now, Ki Oma Barak Barkai, I saw a Heir Yom. I know that the horizon is full of the radiance of the sun. It's bathed in the light of the sun. It's time for the Talmud. Is Horidu Kohen Gadol lebeis hatvila. Now's the right moment for the Kohen Gadol to begin the day of Yom Kippur's worth of avoda, and this avoda can only be implemented by the Kohen Gadol, and therefore he has to be tovel. This is the tefillah at the beginning of the morning. Tani avua de Rabbi Ovin, lozu bilvad amru. In other words, not only with regard to shechita, which is relevant to 90% of the zvachim, do we say that the shechita that was done at night, it is possible, and then we have to burn the korban. Ela af malikas ha'of ukmitzas mincha. Even with regard to something like malikas ha'of or kmitzas mincha, if it was done balayla tisarek. In other words, malika in oaf and kmitza in mincha are replacements, are parallel to shchita in zevach behema. And just like shchita balayla is psula, so too in the cases of malikas ha'of and kmitzas mincha, laila is poseles. So the Gemara asks, Bishlema olas ha'of. I understand that in the case of olas ha'of, if they did the malik at night, then there's nothing left. My dahava hava. You cannot reverse the situation. There's no way of salvaging a malika vis-a-vis this oath, bismana, in its proper time during the day. Ela komets. Well, I don't understand what you're talking about with regard to komets. Here on Chav Tesam and Beis. Nahadre unahadre v'nikmitzei b'yoma. Why can't we put the komets back into its kli? So in other words, he did the kmitz at night. Okay, so what's so terrible? Whatever he did, we'll put it back into the kli. And then in the morning, we'll do the kmitza. So Gemara says, "Who tanivu amala?" Avin was the one who brought this price, and he interprets the price. Lishares mekadshin. I'm sorry, I skipped a few words. But in the case of kmitza, is nahadav v'nikmitza b'yimama. In the case of malika sa'of, it's an irreversible situation. There's nothing left after the malika. But in the case of kmitza, we can put the komets back into the kli, and in the morning we could do the kmitza. Why do you tell me that the carbon is completely possible? So Gemara answers, "Klishares mekadshin afilu shelo bisman." All right, this is already what I call heavy kudsh. Klishores mekadshin afilu shalo bizman. In every case of a carbon mincha, you have kmitza, the komets, which is burnt on the mizbeach, and you have shirayim, which is nechal l'zichrei kuhuna. What's going to happen is that if you put the komets back into the kli, and the kli is a kli shares, you're going to have a mixture of komets and shirayim in the same kli. Shaliachar kmitza is a komets tone nesina v'kiddush b'kli shares. The kemet shenasan as a komets b'kli is afilu sha'asa zos b'layla shein says man kmitza his kaddish. So the power of the klishares is such that it can be makadish what you put into it, even if that's not ready right now for zman hakrov. It's preempting the zman hakrov. The kevan shes kadesh is mashenosar bekli harehu shirayim. Mashenosar bekli harehu shirayim. So if I understand correctly, what happens is you had a klishares, and the Kohen took off a kmitza, and this all happened at night. What's left in the klishares is called shirayim. What's in his hand is called the komets, but that komets is invalid because it's lila. But he could return the komets into the kli. Now, what was left in the kli was shirayim after the komets, because the volume of the mincha was much greater than a komets. Now he's got a mixture of komets and shirayim. V'shuv einam chozrim li'isa le'chashev k'mincha shelo nikmitza. There's no way that you could do a second kmitza. In kevan she'akmitza hikmitza b'layla v'ena kshera ein lemincha zu takana v'yotzeis l'sreifa. So there's a psul of kmitza b'layla and klisharis mekadesh afilu shelo b'zmano. So my impression is that when the Gemara asked the kasha nahadre, the nahadre v'nikmitza b'yamama, the Gemara thought was that the original kmitza doesn't register at all. It was Belaila. And therefore, just 1 second. So what's the status of the Shirayim? If there's no kmitza. let the Kohen return the flour to the pan, which contains the shirayim, the rest of the mincha, and then take a new kometz in the daytime. So the Gemara answers that klishores, he translates that as service vessels. Okay, fine. Consecrate, that means mekadshim, afilu shelo bizmano. So once the kometz of the flour is placed in a klishores, even at night, it can no longer be returned to the rest of the mincha. Why not? Because it became posselized. Well, let's see if he has a note here. After the fistful of flour is removed from the rest of the mincha, it is placed in a klisharis. Once the kometz is consecrated, by virtue of its being in this vessel, it attains the status of a kometz. While the rest of the flour becomes shirayim. So again, he separated a kometz, and he put the kometz into a klisharis. And the rest of the flour becomes shirayim. So I thought they were mixed up in one kli, but one second. He says the offering can now never revert to the status of a mincha that has not yet had kmitza. And so returning the fistful to the rest of the flour would just be mixing the kometz with the shirayim. Since the kometz is now forever sanctified as such, right? Because klishos is mekadesh, is therefore kmitza balayla cannot be rectified, and it invalidates the carbon. Not sure if I have this. Let me just try. I apologize. I'm just trying it one more time. He has a kometz, and he put the kometz into a klisharis. And that's makadesh the kometz. And now, what does he want to do? He wants to mix it together, correct? And put the flour back into the kli, which has the shirayim. So since the klisharis is makadesh afilu shelo bizmano, if he returns the kometz together with the rest of the flour, he's mixing kometz and shirayim. The kometz is now forever sanctified. Apsul hu machmas kmitzas halayla. See, I'm trying to figure out what the Gemara is thinking in the Havmina, what's the Gemara's maskana. It sounds like the Gemara in the Havmina thought that there's no psul in Laila. The kmitza retained its original status and there was no psul. And the Gemara answers no. That when you did a kmitza b'Laila, that generates a psul, which is irreversible. That's not enough because the Gemara says kli mekadesh, kli shais mekadesh afil shelo bizmano. So here in the note, he quotes the Stipler, the Kilis Yaakov. Let's see if this helps us at all. She'esakometz efshal hafrish rak mi mincha shekula tevel. This I never understood, that the kometz is from a mincha that's kula tevel. Well, what's he talking about tevel over here? The tevel is in Trumas and Maestros. What hakmitza shenasta balayla kitcha es hakometz the asasas hashar l'shirayin. Hakmitza shenasa balayla kitcha es hakometz asasas hashar l'shirayin. Bafilu im yachzor v'yikmotz bayom kemet shekvar huvrar shechelik zeh hu shirayim v'chelik zeh hu kmitza, because the kmitza at night was mekadesh the komets, separating komets from shirayim. So we had that which is komets and that which is shirayim. Shuv eina nechsheves l'kmitza. Again, it sounds like he's saying that once you've implemented a kmitza, you can't do another kmitza, because now the komets is mixed up together with the shirayim. Somehow there are two principles here that neither of which I understand. One principle is that you can't do kmitza once you've already done a kmitza, if that first kmitza was not valid, unless you mix that kmitza back into its original mixture, and now you're back to square one. It's in its original state. But that you can't do because of another principle, that once you mix something, it's not hoover. You could never get back to the original. So the first kmitza, in one sense, even though it's not a valid kmitza because it was done at night, but it is valid to separate this kmitza. Now you're only missing the act of kmitza b'yom. So you want to wait until the morning and do the kmitza, but you can't do it anymore because the kmitza is mixed up with the shirayim. Now you'll ask me, so why do you have to mix up the kmitza with the shirayim? Why not just leave it as is and do a kmitza? But the answer is that's not a ma'isa kmitza. We go back to our first principle. That kmitza means when you have everything in a mixture and now you set aside the kmitza. Well, you can't set aside the kmitza now because of our second principle, that the kmitza b'layla engenders that particular, those molecules of refined flour as kmitza, as the komets. The kmitza b'layla, even though it's not a kiyum mitzvah, but it's enough to engender a shem komets. Meaning that that's the komets and that's only the komets. But that can't be because In order to do a kmitza, you have to mix the komets with the shirayim. Now you're going to put your hand in. You're not going to come up with the same komets that was already designated by the klisharis as a komets. So it comes out that there are two dinim in kmitza, and the difference between the two is going to be lila. One din of kmitza is that the komets now, once it's designated, becomes sanctified in an irreversible way as komets. And the second din is a din of Maisa Kmitza, that you need to take off the komets and separate it from the rest of the. So now, once you have the first din, that, so now we get to Lila. So what happens at Lila, with the Kmitza Lila? So we said that Kmitza has two dimensions to it. Number one, it designates that specific fistful of flour as komets, and that's irreversible. Now we have another din, and that is to do a Masechet Yoma and take that komets and burn it on the mizbeach. And then Afkamina is going to be Lila, that although the kmitza of Lila could not possibly culminate in the hakrava, the burning of the komets, because there's no such thing as Haktarah b'Laila, but the kmitza b'Laila does designate in an irreversible way, in a permanent way, this is the flour that is the komets. So now, when you're ready by Yom to do a kmitza, where is the komets? If the komets is separated, that's not kmitza. You can't do kmitza on something that's separated from the balance of the refined flour. But on the other hand, if you're going to mix that komets together with the original mixture, then you'll never know which is the komets upon which you're going to do a mitzvah of kmitza, because it's all mixed together. And the Gemara says that this halacha, that once you've designated the kmitza, even balayla, it becomes an irreversible komets. In other words, it always retains its status as komets. The Gemara makes that contingent on the principle of klisharis makadish balayla. So what that means is, if I understand correctly, that since the komets is in a klisharis, and now you did a kmitza, the klishares engenders the status of kodesh on the kmitza, such that now when you do the kmitza, that fistful of flour that you took out is now irreversibly komets. But you need to bring the komets and be makdir on the mizbeach biyom. So you wait, the 12 hours until daybreak. But now what do? You have a fistful of komets. You can't do kmitza on a fistful of komets. You've got, by definition, that's what komets is all about, to mix it together with the rest of the flour. But that we can't do, because once we mix it with the rest of the flour, we can no longer identify where the komets is. I would suggest that we took the komets and we soak it in red ink. I don't mean edible ink, let's say, whatever. I don't want to passel the carbon. But now when he mixes the komets together with the shirayim in that kli, he can identify where the komets is. But leaving out, my hamtza'ah, just mixing the komets with the rest of the shirayim, it's identical. It's what we call blila. It's one complete mixture that's unidentified, because you can't identify where the komets is. And there is a komets inside of this kli together with the shirayim. That's the best I can do, Rabbosai. Again, as I told you, this is like really heavy kudshim. You have to know a lot more about menachos, komets, shirayim. You also have to know more about the role and the power of a klishores. But that's what we have so far. Maybe tomorrow I'll be a little smarter. I'll work on this sugya again in Masechet today. The only trouble is I took upon myself a number of extra shiurim. They called on me, so I took it on as a special shiur that I give for what's called the laws of COVID, of Corona. You know, the special books that have been written about the halachic issues regarding Corona. So now I have the fortunate responsibility to talk about a woman who during Corona is afraid to go to the mikvah. And can she go to the ocean, and what the laws are as far as tevilah, ocean. And another issue about a rofe, a religious physician who doesn't, he's too afraid to deal with some of these COVID patients. What are the halachic parameters? And then I took upon myself a shiur on gardening during Shvius. We're coming up to Shvius before you blink. The end of El will already be Shvius, Tosefet Shvius. So the question is about pots and perforated pots and non-perforated pots, and it's like so complicated.
Rabbi, are these advertised?
I'm going to try to figure out what's going on. As soon as I know more details, if you want to see the advertisements, on top of that, I don't know if you know this, I put out a video once a week. Sometimes I do twice in a week.
That I know about.
You can't imagine how much, just the coming up with an insight into the parsha and then squeezing it into a 2-minute video. And it's supposed to be meaningful. And then to find someone, which is my wife in 99 out of 100 cases, to videotape me. And I usually have to do it a few times until I get it right, because sometimes, I can't think, and get it all into 2 minutes. It's like, plus I have the shtick that I put a piece of artwork in the background. So what?
Notice that.
You notice that?
Yes.
So like last night I videotaped with this is the first time I used a Rembrandt. Now I don't own a Rembrandt, but I own a very, very fine quality, thick poster, a reproduction of what's called the Rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know a little bit about Rembrandt, you know that he was very connected to the Jewish community.
Yes.
On Judenstraat, that's where he lived, on the Jewish street in Amsterdam.
Mm-hmm.
He has a beautiful portrait of a rabbi. That same model, by the way, appears in one of the greatest paintings of Rembrandt in the Met, in the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's called Aristotle Contemplating the Bust of Homer. But Aristotle is actually a young yeshiva guy probably from Portugal. The Portuguese Jews were running away from persecution and they came to Holland. The Netherlands was more or less a little bit more liberal. And it's interesting because I'm sure I'm not the first one to notice this, that it's the same sitter who's called Portrait of a Rabbi that I used yesterday. And Aristotle was not a rabbi, you know that. All right. Anyway, I chewed your ear off. So everyone should have a great day, and we'll see if we could figure out a little bit better this Komets business and the Klishores by tomorrow.
Thank you.
Have a great day.